All right, welcome to another episode of Letters of Intent. I am Pankaj Raval, your co-host, and this is the podcast for deal makers and risk takers. Today, I'm here with my co-host, Sahil Chaudry, and also a special guest, Justin Gordon. Sahil, take it away.
That's right. I am associate attorney here at Carbon Law, and today we're going to be interviewing a very good friend of mine, someone I've known for years. We went to college together. We took some courses in law school together. We've been friends. We've been involved in politics, public service as well. I'm really proud to introduce Justin Gordon. Justin, welcome.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you.
So, Justin, you are a Santa Monica native. You are a USC and Dodgers fan. If anyone follows your social accounts, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of Dodgers content. I'm a subscriber to the Justin Gordon Instagram page. So
yeah, a lot of Dodgers, a lot of politics. Not too much wills and trusts. I save that for my LinkedIn, but
right, exactly. That's right. So, Justin, you run a family law practice with your father, Gordon and Gordon. It's focused on trusts and estates. And one thing I noticed, Justin, is ever since I've known you, you have the ability to combine, I think, technical aspects of law, but your personality is actually very, in a way, you're very empathetic. You've got this way of explaining complex matters and emotionally sensitive issues, too, when it comes to the law. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you see trusts and estates as an attorney. Is it, what is it? What is the kind of driving factor for you? What is the passion element here? What really motivates you every day when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, well, I think, maybe more so than most fields in the law, trust and estates is a people-oriented business. It's a volume business. You have a lot of people that need estate plans, or their families didn't plan in advance and they're going through probate, or there's a trust administration, and you need to walk them through this at what is oftentimes a very difficult point in their life. Someone just passed away. They're dealing with grief. They're dealing with emotions. They've got siblings who are, on their back about getting distribution. So you need to have empathy. You need to, feel like where they've come from, and, having an experience, with death or with other families who have experienced death, and the process of either probate or trust administration is really key to, oftentimes hand holding and walking clients through a difficult time in their life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think trust and estates is such a fascinating area. When I first started practicing, worked with a trust lawyer, actually in law school, and I always found it fascinating the challenges also with this area, because a lot of people don't like talking about death, right? I think we have this aversion, especially in the West, for talking about death and kind of preparing for end of life. Tell me a little bit, like, how do you deal with that with clients? How have you addressed that? What are your thoughts on addressing mortality? Love to hear more, because this area of law definitely intersects with that a lot.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear if you guys have experience with other cultures and death and how they treat that. But in the West, it's something that you just want to put off. You don't want to deal with. It's going to be years away. And so we get a lot of clients who've been like, yeah, I've been wanting to do this for 20 years and I just never got around to it. And as my mother-in-law says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. And I think that applies perfectly to estate planning. Because if you're still alive and you have capacity, you can do an estate plan, right. And it's there to protect, your interests, but also your spouse, your children, your grandchildren. And so we do get a lot of clients who, reluctantly are there, but, there was a health scare, or a family member passed away or a friend passed away, and it hit them. And they said, you know what, I've got to do this to protect my family and make sure that there will be, a smooth transition, or as smooth a transition as possible when that time comes. And so we try to we try to use a lot of humor, and we try to, be personable and empathetic so that the process doesn't feel like, this is it, this is the end. No, this is just the beginning of you getting your affairs in order for that time decades from now where you might, face mortality. But what we try to remind them is that you're going to have peace of mind after this, because that you've taken care of your affairs and you don't have to think about it being on the to-do list every day.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. Yeah, you asked about thoughts about mortality. I mean, Sahil and I are both Hindu, and there's a lot of thought. There's discussion about reincarnation, in Hinduism and all that. But even I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and even on my desk, I was showing you this here. I have this little memento mori. This is a statue of Marcus Aurelius with a skull, and it's from Stoicism. And Stoicism, they have this whole idea that we are all going to die, memento mori, and and I'm a big fan of Buddhism too, and the belief that life is impermanent and everything is impermanent. So we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I feel like there should be that a bit of understanding that nothing is guaranteed. So why not get your affairs in order sooner rather than later, because we don't know what tomorrow will hold. And the best thing we can do is prepare, for now, right now in this present moment. So I think it's important to remember that life is finite, and because it reminds us also how we treat people and how we deal with people and how we deal with others, because we want to be remembered for, I think, treating people well, as opposed to treating people with they're like a transaction, like we unfortunately see in some situations nowadays in politics. Yeah.
I wish, Pankaj, you make a good point. We are Hindu, and yet we can't will our assets to our next incarnation. And I feel like that's something we need to.
That's a new field.
We need to work on. There should be
something with AI and reincarnation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, if we're going to be on the verge of transferring your consciousness, right? Whether it's reincarnation or some other body, I want to just throw that out there that I hope Gordon and Gordon is looking at that.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
Yeah. Justin, can you tell us about, your path into estate planning? It feels like a niche segment of the law. What kind of courses did you take? What kind of mentors did you have? How did you find your way into this niche?
Yeah, so I'm not going to lie. If my father didn't practice trust and estates, I might not have known about, what a amazing and wonderful field it truly is. Growing up, I knew that my dad was a lawyer, and, it was sort of an esoteric field, and it seemed dry and boring with paper and wills and all that. And so I went to law school out in Philadelphia at Temple University, and I knew that I wanted to come back to California at some point. They had offered me a scholarship, so I went to the cold from Southern California.
You went to Temple, and then I know we got to spend some time together at UCLA. You were a visiting student, which was so much fun. Yeah,
and we actually took Wills and Trust together, which was one of my favorite classes. So I knew I wanted to take the California bar, and I was sort of deciding between entertainment and trust and estates. Entertainment, sounds, fun and exciting. And, after doing a couple internships, it was a little bit drier than I expected. It wasn't so glamorous of a field. And so I also worked with my father when I was out in California, and just meeting with different families and seeing the different issues that come up and how probate and trust intersect with so many other fields of law, that it's just a constant, quest for learning, because you're always learning about new areas of the law and how they intersect with, this main field. So I took that class at UCLA. I also took federal income taxation, which I thought was really fascinating. And, after taking the California bar, decided that, I'll give this a try and work in the family business, so to speak. And I've been working there for the last almost 13 years, and it's been great. Awesome. My father's a wealth of knowledge. And I sort of bring us into the 21st century in terms of getting us online and digital marketing. So it's a good balance between that, knowledge and modernity.
That's something I noticed, Pankaj, about kind of your sense and Justin's sense of entrepreneurship. Justin, you were pretty quick to bring your firm online, and you figured out kind of the value of online reviews. And I noticed, Pankaj, you were also pretty early to that. So I'd love to kind of hear, actually, both of you talk a little bit about that level of entrepreneurship with the law and how the internet changed the game.
Yeah, Justin, I mean, please, you're our guest. I'd love to hear your thoughts first. I mean, yeah, how did you?
Yeah, I'll give you a little background. And I'd have to give 95% of the credit to my wife, whose background is in marketing and social and digital strategy. And so back in 2014, she told me, it might be a good idea for you to set up a Yelp page. And, I looked at her crazy. I'm like, Yelp is for, restaurants and pet groomers. Like, why would I, as an attorney, set up a Yelp page? And she said, not everybody knows a trust and estates attorney. It's just because you are one doesn't mean that, other people know one. And so she said, it's probably a good idea to start building those reviews over time. And, eventually I think a lot of attorneys are going to be on there. And, lo and behold, we have significant reviews and they're all good, thank God. And it's, I can't tell you how many people come to us because they didn't know a trust and estates attorney. They Googled, trust and estates attorney Los Angeles or went on Yelp, and they found us online. So I would say the majority of new clients now found us on Yelp or Super Lawyers or Avo, which is like Yelp for lawyers, avvo.com, which is a great site as well.
No, it's so funny. Actually, I think that's around the same time I first went on Yelp, is 2014. And my story is like, somewhat similar. It's funny. Like I was working as a solo in my office was in Koreatown, sharing with these two other guys, the two other lawyers, just legitimately smarter than me. Like these guys went to like University of Chicago, Georgetown, great guys. They were very good attorneys, but they just didn't want to take any risks. And I think that's sometimes the challenge, getting a little philosophical, is when we kind of have these identities that we don't want to, we don't want to sacrifice. We don't want any blemish on this identity that we've created. We're now less willing to take risks. We're more averse to taking risks. So I said, hey, you know what? Trying to build this business, been struggling, in rebuilding this, my firm, getting more clients. People are on Yelp. Let me try putting myself on Yelp. And this was in Koreatown. And the next day, without any reviews, I, got a client. It was like $1,000 matter, but I was like, it was a client, and it was just, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to go network. I didn't have to go to all these different meetings. It was amazing, right? It changed everything. It opened my mind. And these two guys were like, "No, man, you can't do it. You're going to get one bad review, and your career's over." Yeah. And I said, one bad review, my career's not even really going right now. So what do I have to lose?
No, that's a great story. Yeah. And there are certain areas of law, I think, where, you might not want to have a Yelp page. If you do evictions all the time, that might be a tough place where people will write some bad reviews. If you're in family law, there's always some tension going on in there. But I try to treat every client, as a person, and also that there might be a grade at the end of this and it could end up online. So, you've got to, be conscious of that.
Yeah. And also, like, from our whole philosophy in our firm too, has always been like Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you did. They'll forget, what you said, but we won't ever forget how you made them feel. And our goal is like always make them feel taken care of. I'm pretty sure I butchered the quote, but essentially that's it. So, I mean, that's how we approach it. And I feel like if you just focus on the person and making sure they're taken care of, because oftentimes they're trusting us to make sure the documents are right, make sure that, what's in there is right. And if we're competent, we'll do that. We'll do that job. But it's also beyond that, making sure that they understand the process, that we communicate with them. I mean, so much, I think you guys can probably attest, comes down to communication. It's like those attorneys, I think, that get good reviews and are happy clients are the ones that communicate well. And I've always put an emphasis on that in our firm. But I love to hear about how you guys have managed to get so many great reviews and how you go about your philosophy on dealing with clients.
Yeah, I think communication is key. Just getting back to clients in a reasonable amount of time is you're doing more than 90% of other attorneys are. We hear situations of clients coming to us and they haven't been able to get a hold of their attorney for a couple weeks or months, and I don't understand what's going on where an attorney isn't responding for in more than a few days unless they're out of town, and there should be an away message or somebody that can step in if they're not available. But I think communication and responsiveness is so important to making sure that clients feel like they're taken care of. A lot of these clients are dealing with very anxious situations, or they're anxious people. And as long as they're able to talk to you or get some sort of response, I think it can calm them down and make them feel like they're in good hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to actually change the conversation a little bit, pivot a little bit to the specifics, some of the dynamics around estate planning. Just today, funny enough, my dad texted me and he said that, someone in their neighborhood, he was 53, passed away without a will. So in those situations, can you tell me what happens? What happens if you don't have a will, and maybe even explain to us even the point, the difference between a will and a trust or an estate plan, and maybe break that down for us, because I think a lot of listeners is still somewhat complicated, the difference between all these different documents.
No, absolutely. So this is just California specific since I'm only licensed in California. But if in California you own real property and you don't have a trust, at some point there's going to be a probate. Which is a court proceeding where there's a judge and an administrator or executor needs to be appointed. It's public. It's very expensive. Attorneys love it because there's very high fees and costs. But the goal for most ethical estate planning attorneys will be to set up a trust, especially if there's real estate involved. If someone only has a will, but they don't have real estate, there are ways of making sure that your assets don't go through probate by putting beneficiary designations on retirement accounts and brokerage accounts and other bank accounts. But if you have real estate, you basically have to set up some sort of trust in order to make sure that your assets get to your beneficiaries without a court proceeding. So your question about if someone didn't have a trust or will, what happens, and if they have over a certain amount of money and they don't have beneficiaries designated, right now it's $184,500. If you have less than that, you can use a small estate affidavit in California. But if it's over that, they'll end up in court where the siblings might be fighting over who's going to be in charge. If there's no spouse, there's an order for how appointments work. You have to, pay thousands in fees for different petitions. You've got to publish in the newspaper. It's a total mess and can take over a year to get the assets from the decedent to the heirs. And California decides, who are your intestate heirs. If you don't have a will, it's called intestate. So you're basically just leaving it up to chance that California gets it right. And sometimes that means that your assets will go to some first cousin that you've never met or a sibling that is your enemy. So by getting at least a will together, you're at least saying to the court, okay, this is who I want to receive my assets. Here's who I want to have in charge. And then you leave it up to the executor or the court to make sure that your assets get to your intended beneficiaries. But if you don't do anything, it's just going based on the default in California.
Interesting. And can you tell us a little bit more about an estate plan? What does that involve? Why is it even important for me to have an estate plan?
So it's not just about assets. If you're alive and you have children or family members that you love, you want to have something in place. And that if you have real estate or significant assets, usually a trust is the most important document. And the difference, to answer your question about what's the difference between a trust and a will comes into effect only at death. and deals with the transfer of property. A trust begins, if it's a revocable living trust, it begins immediately and can help ensure that there is a succession if you become incapacitated, for instance. A successor trustee can step in and help administer the assets and take care of the person who set up the trust, also called the settlor, while they're still living. Having a trust also can help avoid conservatorship. If you become incapacitated and you don't have any documents, someone has to go to court and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get appointed as your conservator to take care of your health and your assets and all that. Whereas if you have a trust in place, if you have what's called an advanced healthcare directive, someone, an agent that can make healthcare decisions for you if you're not able to do so yourself, you're in a coma or have dementia. And then lastly, a financial power of attorney, someone that can handle ongoing litigation or do your tax returns, deal with Social Security, Medicare. So all of these pieces come together as an estate plan so that if you become incapacitated or pass on, there is a plan for what happens next, who's in charge, where your assets go.
Interesting.
So it sounds like there's actually quite a high cost to doing nothing and just letting things go to probate. What are some common misconceptions that people have about probate and the laws of wills and trusts?
Yeah. So, I've had clients, I don't know if they're all just looking at ChatGPT or Google and trying to come up with, what the law is. And that's fine. Sometimes it gets it right. Sometimes it doesn't. But, for instance, there's something called a no contest clause. And so some people think, if you put that no contest clause in your trust, it means that nobody can contest it. And that's not exactly right. It basically means that if you have this no contest clause in your trust, and someone does challenge it for, let's say, incapacity or fraud or undue influence, and they lose and they didn't have probable cause to challenge the trust, they'll lose out on their inheritance, what they were going to receive under the trust. But if you don't leave them anything, they really have nothing to lose. So the goal with a no contest clause is to leave them something. So let's say you have one child who's, really evil and, has done a lot of bad things, and then the other one is great, and you want to make the distribution uneven. So, let's say, 80-20, you want to make sure that you have this no contest clause in there because the one receiving 20% will have to think twice because they will lose that 20% if they didn't have a, sufficient reason or probable cause to bring a challenge to the trust after you're gone.
Interesting.
Some other misconceptions is, I've had parents that say, even though my children don't get along and they're always fighting, I'm going to name them as co-trustees and, they'll work together after I'm gone. And that's almost the exact opposite of what happens because you're adding in death, you're adding in money, you're adding in this sibling rivalry, and all of that comes to a head after the parents pass away. And that is just a recipe for litigation. And so oftentimes where you have children that don't get along, we'll recommend something called a professional fiduciary. This is someone who's licensed by the state of California, bonded, insured, and this is what they do day in, day out. They act as trustees or administrators or executors or conservators, and so they have the resources. They, know good CPAs and good realtors and financial, planners and managers that can help them. Whereas, you put the kids in charge, and there's just going to be a whole lot of dispute and money wasted on attorneys.
Absolutely. Interesting.
There is an intersection with what we do with corporate law. For example, in most of our LLC agreements, we include a spousal consent, which acknowledges that the shares are separate property. That's usually something that we would include. And then also, we notice that many small business owners or founders, they will be very successful as business people, but leave a mess of corporate governance documents, especially like family businesses, kind of assume that everything's going to work out. And there are a lot of verbal agreements and understandings. And sometimes there are incorporation documents and no bylaws, and nothing has been really followed. So I just wonder, how often does your work necessitate some kind of corporate cleanup as part of a transfer?
Yeah, it comes up more than you think. And that's where trust and estates attorneys can work with firms like yours to make sure, everybody's got eyes on the documents, that everything's in place. When we set up a revocable living trust, that's part one. The second part is making sure that the assets get into the trust. So that's whether that's preparing a deed and getting that recorded to transfer a house into the trust, whether that's, telling the clients to go to the bank and brokerage institutions to retitle the accounts in the name of the trust. And that also involves preparing assignments of LLC interests into the trust. So we'll have to review the operating agreements, make sure that there's nothing that prevents an assignment of a membership interest into the trust. Most operating agreements these days allow for that, but you don't want to, do anything that's going to cause problems to the LLC. If they have an S corp, if it's a small business, doing the corporate minutes, voiding the shares that are in their individual names and reissuing the shares into the name of the trust is an important next step to make sure that they're having annual meetings and meeting their obligations. Those two, like I said, a lot of fields intersect, and this is where there's an intersection between corporate law and trust and estates.
Yeah, I think there's obviously so much we could talk about with estate planning. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the future and also how technology is playing a role in your practice going forward. Well, I guess maybe first, because you have a background in politics and you're interested in politics, I'd love to understand, like, what do you see kind of coming down the line? What's the future look like for estate planning with regard to the change in laws? What should people maybe be watching out for as in this administration, and maybe just in the future laws coming into effect?
Yeah, so 99.5% of families are not going to have to worry about estate taxes. I know there's a lot of politicians that, say, oh, the death taxes and this and that. Right now, the estate tax exemption is 14 million per spouse. So you can have 28 million per couple right now, at least, and there won't be a dollar of estate taxes going to the federal government. California hasn't had an inheritance tax since the 1980s. You'd expect California, which is a pretty high tax state, to have an inheritance tax, but they don't. Other states do. So for most people, there's not going to be a lot of taxes on the recipient side for the heirs. There's also something called a step up in basis, which is for capital gains purposes. If the parents bought a house 40 years ago for $100,000 and now it's worth $3 million, that gain after the parents pass away from $100,000 to $3 million gets wiped out by operation of death. So there's actually a death benefit for holding on to appreciating assets, at least under current law. With taxes, right now, if you have less than 28 million, there's not going to be a whole lot in taxes for a married couple. But that law is going to sunset at the end of this year. But I assume with a Republican president in Congress, they're going to extend those tax breaks. It's fluctuated over the years, but at least right now, our practice doesn't consist of a whole lot of tax planning. There are larger firms that are dealing with very wealthy individuals that, are figuring out all sorts of gimmicks to avoid estate taxes, starting foundations, irrevocable life insurance trusts. But for the vast majority of our clients and people in California, there's not going to be estate taxes. So, for the future, I think that the high estate tax exemptions are going to be around for a while. Who knows? It could be AOC getting in with far left Congress, and they'll flip it, and the exemption will be much lower. So there's always this uncertainty, which I think keeps lawyers in business.
Yes.
Because,
Right.
there's always some work to be done.
So one other question I had is just in terms of, our clients, the listeners, a lot of them are business owners, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. What's some advice you would have for a business owner or entrepreneur looking to make sure that their estate is that they're protected? And does it matter how old you are to start thinking about this?
There's a common misconception that you have to be, in your 70s or 80s to start thinking about estate planning. And I would say that, this applies to founders, but it applies to, all, folks who, have families. and just want to make sure that their assets get passed down, it's really never too early to start. Even if you just get something very basic down, a big issue that comes up with a lot of families is who's going to be the guardian to my children. And I've had clients end up in therapy trying to figure out, because they can't agree on, who's going to, if something happens to both of us and we have minor children, who's going to be our children's legal parent, legal guardian. That issue has come up multiple times where they're just stuck and they can't, the whole planning process can't move forward because they can't figure out who that guardian is going to be. And, in those situations, it's really up to the probate judge to decide who the guardian is, but your will include, basically your recommendations. So you don't want to hold up your whole estate plan just because you can't figure out who's going to be that person. So we've recommended just put 2 people down. Then you've at least narrowed it down to 2 instead of, not having anything. Yeah. So I think that's, a common issue with young families, whether they're founders or not, and just, trying to figure out who's going to take care of the kids. Another thing, like I had mentioned, is just making sure all of your assets that need to be in the trust get there. Whether that's your, ownership interests in LLCs or your corporate shares, that takes time to get those assets, retitled into the trust. But if you leave them out, you might end up in probate court, which would defeat much of the purpose of setting these documents up in the first place. So I would definitely recommend to people to get started sooner rather than later. If you're married and, expect to have kids or have kids, that's a great time to get started. And then you can kind of set it. I don't want to say set it and forget it, but you can set it and look at it, every few years to make sure that, the successor trustees, the agents are still who you want them to be. You might have a falling out with someone and realize, oh my God, I can't believe I named this person as my, executor. I'm going to have to make a change. But for most people, they can leave their estate plan in place for many, many years, decades, and not have to change it. And so, there's no annual fee to have an estate plan like there is with, LLCs or corporations. There's no separate tax return that you need to do with this type of revocable living trust. So it's a lot less complicated for most people than people realize. And I think that can be a roadblock for people getting started.
Makes sense.
So for, let's say, some of our clients who this feels very financially daunting, emotionally daunting, how does someone start? What's the first step if you want to get your affairs in order?
Yeah, the first step, whether it's with our firm or any estate planning firm, is to reach out and see if you can set up a consultation. Our policy is to offer a complimentary consultation for an hour because we think that, it's a good way to meet clients, get them to know who we are, we get to know who they are, and they feel comfortable, working with us, because we see this as, a lifelong relationship. And a lot of times, I expect the clients want to work with my father because he has a lot of experience, but many times they want to work with me because they want to, get to know me, because it'll be their children who are going to be working with me, decades from now, hopefully down the line. So they like the fact that there is this sort of succession within the succession planning. Yeah. It's, a little bit meta there. Right. But it's something that, I take pride in, that there is a succession plan for our firm, and there's a succession plan for the client as well.
Amazing. I love it. Well, this has been really, really fascinating. I think obviously a lot more to chat about. Yeah, I mean, anything else you'd like to leave with listeners about just estate planning yourself? How and also let us know how we can find you. How people can find you online, on social. If you can provide all that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think this just goes back to, what we've been talking about all along, is that, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're in business, it's really about people and having empathy and being a good person, and that'll pay dividends. I think that goes back to karma in general. Yes. That, if you treat people how you want to be treated, things will, for the most part, work out. And so if there are listeners out there that want to learn more, our website is gordontrust.com, GORDONTRUST.com. they can reach out. There's a way to message on our website. They can look at our reviews on Yelp and Avo and see if they think that we would be a good fit for them. But, this is a people business, and we enjoy, the volume of people that come in and seeing everyone's story and trying to make the process as smooth as possible, and also the process of administration after they're gone as smooth as possible as well.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining. This is, again, Letters of Intent, the podcast for deal makers and risk takers. Justin, thank you so much for your time and insight here today. You've been super informative about the estate planning process, really broken it down and made it really simple for people to understand. So really appreciate that, and loved hearing more about your also journey. Sahil, any last words for us today?
I think just the final takeaway, as far as I can see, is that estate planning is a gift to your loved ones. Don't avoid it, and be sure to reach out to Gordon Trust when you're ready to make your plan for your family.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been really, really interesting, and hearing your perspective on your practice and how our two practices might interconnect has been a real joy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.